Yes, I mean, I was struck by the 40 billion that they're talking about for CCS. Back in 2009, E.ON, I come from Kent, and E.ON proposed to have a new coal-fired power station and they were going to have CCS. They said, never mind, we're going to have CCS. And people may remember, you know, there was big campaigns, there was climate camp, and in the end, what happened was that the CCS. What happened to the CCS? They decided not to go ahead with the coal-fired power station in the end, and the reason was that neither the government nor the government was expecting E.ON to put in lots of money. E.ON was expecting the government to put in lots of money, and neither of them were prepared to go ahead. And I think that this is, you know, when you look about, I mean, the whole point about CCS is that this is not just for every power station, this is also for many industrial processes as well. And you just think, you know, and the fact of the matter is we still don't have any CCS here in Britain, you know, all these years later. You know, and it's just sheer fantasy. It's utter fantasy. It isn't going, you know, it doesn't even work. It doesn't work economically. It doesn't work practically. It simply doesn't work. It doesn't exist. You know, that's the reality.
Thanks.
Can I add to that? There's 50 projects that were failures in the USA, and there's been no success at all.
Thanks. The person behind you, and then...
Yeah, Charlotte, and I technically work for the government because I'm a civil servant, which makes life very interesting. I'm also based in Manchester. But one of the things, like, the presentations are really, really interesting. The reason I came to this is because I think there's a general narrative that actually we don't need to do anything because we're waiting for a technical solution. That's the kind of dominant narrative. And actually, I think what we need to do as trade unionists is blast that apart by giving people alternate, you know, what the reality of DRAX, the reality of hydrogen, and all of those things, and get those facts out there. But I think we also have to give people an alternative of what we can do as well, because I think quite often, you know, the way the far right portray the climate movement is that we're going to ruin life for everybody. You're not going to be allowed to go more than 15 minutes from your house. You know, you're not going to be allowed to do anything. And we have to give alternatives. And I think we need to make it as part of our trade union bargaining. So one of the things that I've been thinking of within the civil service is actually, I mean, John Maloney was talking earlier about actual green bargaining, but one of the things is actually demanding more time off work, like 4-day week and longer holiday periods. And the reason for that is A, you can catch a train to Europe. You don't have to fly. You can bloody well catch a train to Europe, you know, and improve trains to Europe. And B, you reduce the actual transport in and out of work. But it's like making those connections between, you know, aviation is never going to be carbon neutral. It just isn't. So we have to stop flying, but we're not also saying to people, you can never have a holiday, you can never see the sun again. I live in Manchester, for God's sake, I need some sun. So I think we get the facts out, but we have to then put it into green bargaining. And I'll just finish on one final thing, is DRAX. DRAX trains pass through our region regularly, right? On the train down this morning, I messaged an RNT member I know and said, can you give me the times that DRAX trains are passing through our region? And he has done that. And we're going to go to the stations where DRAX passes through, and we're going to hand out leaflets to everybody in those stations because people don't know what it is. And it's like getting that information out, and that's about using trade unions. I was really pleased an RNT member said, here you go, this is the freight trains, and this is what we're going to do.
Yes,
yeah, there's a couple. I mean, I want to say about a couple of things. One is about, you know, it's often portrayed as a binary, you know, fossil fuels and renewables, but renewables use rare earths, and they are highly pollutant to actually produce. The oldest solar panels are going out of use, and there isn't an industrial process recycle them. I saw an article on BBC last week about what to do with old wind turbines, because they are also coming up. And the answer was that there wasn't a process to get the rare earths back. I understand Japan has a lab process, but it's not scale. It's not to scale to do that. But the idea of recycling the fiberglass and the resin was to use the blades to make stuff in children's playgrounds. So if we're going to have a proper discussion, then it needs to be a whole, because I mean, in the organisations I'm in, people will say, you know, it's like fossil fuels or renewables without looking at a holistic approach. And just because with rare earths the pollution isn't here doesn't mean that renewables are necessarily greener, and certainly not in the world as it is at the moment. The other thing is that they've just started, you know, deep sea mining for the rare earths, and if we destroy the ocean floor, then what consequences does that have on the whole biosystem of the planet and the ecology and on climate change? So I think there needs to be because everybody has their pet thing, I find, with climate, and that we need to look at it on a more, as I say, holistic level if we're going to manage to keep humanity on the planet.
Thank you.
Yes, I came here because I came here because I thought also it would be a platform for organising and getting ideas, and it was nice to hear what you said there. One of the narratives that I think we are trapped into is the narrative of green growth and job growth. If we talk in terms of degrowth as an opposite to that, then we make people worried because they have experienced austerity and they associate that with degrowth. We all know that we have to reduce our consumption, etc. But I think making people aware that growth hasn't worked out for them, that it is actually accumulation and it is very unequal, and then it is thanks through this inequality that we are producing unsustainability. So making that link between inequality and unsustainability, I think is an important thing to get out as trade unionists. So refusing the narrative that if we get more equality, there will be more consumption. Actually, there is a lot of carbon emissions because of inequality. The ones who are consuming a lot are the wealthy and so on. So if we don't place inequality at the core of the model of growth that we have been working with, I think we are missing the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. Just to say, I mean that is extremely important. And I think that one of the things that we see is that a lot of those kind of developments that are billed as levelling up actually generate inequality, because things like, I mean, you know, look at one of the most unequal towns that I've ever been to in the country is Whitehaven, where the national income is, sorry, falling over my words today, the average income in Whitehaven is higher than the national average, and yet the high street's boarded up, people are on their uppers. It's higher than the national average because of Sellafield, who pay, you know, pretty high wages. But you've really got to drill down into these things and you know, think that projects that deliver growth tend to actually very often tend to deliver increased inequality that actually makes things worse for ordinary people. So And I think people know this instinctively, not just instinctively, I mean, they know it through observation, don't they? They know that they know who it is that's getting richer and richer whilst they still can't afford to keep a decent roof over their kids' heads. So, but it's making, yeah, it's, what can we do? Yeah, making those links more obvious in the way that we organise and in the way that we talk to people. Anybody else?
Another thing is, like, we keep being told there isn't any money. But there's money for subsidies that we've heard about today for greenwashing and drugs. We heard yesterday there would be money for more nuclear weapons. There's no money for the health service. I don't, you know, like, we should be asking about that, I think, as well. And growth that will allow business as usual, more consumerism. I mean, it's a tricky one to say people need to consume less, because if you're living in poverty and struggling, I think you probably feel I'm thinking aloud, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
If you're struggling to pay the rent and put food on the table, I don't think you want to be told like that way around, you see.
Yeah.
But so we need to redistribute this stuff, but we need to spend it on things that people really do need, like better hospital care or more GPs and all those things. And what came into my mind was our local park where I volunteer, where there's some very ingenious young people going in, destroying raised beds so they can have bonfires. And when I see what they're doing, you know, I think, wow, they're so persistent, they've got such energies. You know, if only they were on our side, if only that was channeled. And I mean, you know, the local people know that when they were young, they had youth workers, they had ping pong and, I mean, not ping pong, football and all sorts of sports and other activities to channel. And that's, I feel that somebody was talking about positive solution, you know, promoting things like 4-day weeks and holidays. You know, we seem to be forgetting all those things because the drive is to have whatever the latest, I don't know, trainers or, you know, electric cars for a 3-year-old, for goodness sake, next door to me. So that was a bit of a rant, but I think it's just, what is the economy for?
And can I just interject there as well, that what do we mean by a wage? Because, you know, what do we mean by a wage? Because a wage, you know, a salary, yeah. The money that you get for doing to make profit for a boss, that thing. But that's only one part of, you know, if we broaden that, if we perhaps include the concept of the social wage, like the value of your wage depends on the availability of collective goods as well, like healthcare, sure. Like you know, elder care, childcare, education. All of these things are all just as much part of our wage. You know, somebody earning, you know, X amount a year is in a very different position depending on whether they can live in decent state-provided housing and access healthcare and whatever disability support if they need it or whatever. You know, then somebody has to pay for all of that from their whatever salary they get. So it's, yeah, just I think it's just worth in a sense it's the things that constitute the social wage that are the most relevant to equality, I think, and which are the most relevant to again, that term levelling up. I mean, you know, the way you level up is by having a progressive taxation system, or reduced wage differentials, and putting the emphasis onto the social goods, the collective goods. It was.
Just come back at the end.
Yeah, so
he had his hand up first.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about, you two talked a bit about these places in the global south and poor communities in the US with the drugs. And I was interested in, like, if we're going to build something, we have to think globally. We can't just think like about us here in the UK. We're not a sort of entity that exists independent of everything else. There's a global economy. We get a lot of our consumer goods come from China. You know, there's loads of stuff going on that we're not talking about here, or you know, that we probably do need to sort of look at where we're getting our consumer goods from, etc. I just wonder about the situation around, you showed a map of Africa where a lot of the hydrogen stuff is going to be, you talked about the people in Louisiana and places, you know. Is there moves like towards getting information, making connections, solidarity, that kind of stuff? You know, how do you see us kind of moving forward in terms of thinking about how we link up as working class people globally and make it a global movement rather than just about our particular interests here in the UK?
The webinar?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, really good question. And we're very lucky that we do actually, there's a lot of really strong community resistance in the southern US and in Canada and other places as well, but particularly in the southern US. And we're very lucky that we've got a lot of links with them. So there's actually a couple of them are coming over in a couple of weeks for Drax's AGM, where we're doing like various events and that sort of thing. Before then, there's going to be a webinar on the 18th of April, is the month we're in, which we can share around all of you, where there'll be speakers from different frontline communities. We're also going to be supporting like a petition hand-in from those communities about what is being funded by the British government to happen to those communities. And then we've done various different solidarity actions. We quite often try very, very hard to amplify what they're saying in our messaging. So not just talking about, you know, the UK's carbon emissions, but wherever we are, very much speaking and reading quotes from them and pushing forward what they want to say, and then try to bring them over to talk to politicians and people. And I think there is always more that can be done. But there's a real want from that side of the Atlantic to work with us as much as there is from us to them. And so I think there's even more opportunity to grow going forward and looking at, you know, just transition for that side of things as well, and how we can do more actions and continue raising that voice, because they're the ones being harmed with our money at the end of the day. So it's essential that we do all we can, really.
Just to say that it is 1:30, so people, you know, you're free to go if you want to go and get your lunch. But I'd like to give Pascoe and Jonathan a chance to come back in before we.
Just going to quickly on this. At this time next month, where we're now 13th, on the 14th, going to South Africa. So South Africa, in fact, we're working in North Africa with some groups there, but to resist is fucking dangerous. We've got a really repressive government. If you speak out, you get locked up. So whilst we've been able to produce information, we've not been able to have strong links with groups there. I mean, we translated our reports into Arabic and French, and they've been used. But in South Africa, there's more freedom of civil society. So we're going down there, working with communities on both sides of South Africa. We're fighting green hydrogen. But you realise it's not just green hydrogen. So they've been fighting diamond mining. They're fighting oil and gas. They're fighting platinum. You've got all these big plans that are coming in. They've been fighting coal for ages. And it's the same stories, the same companies, the same investment banks coming along and saying the same rubbish. So I think the important thing is to, I guess like Mary said, make sure it's their voices that are the ones being heard. And so as well as us, we're going to go with this little film crew, try and bring back a lot of materials, get that out in, so I guess, Europe, like Brussels politically, but also then amongst movements across Europe. And then the plan is to next spring bring a speaker tour of people to come and give voice themselves to what's happening. I think it's really important because what we've seen, so we're going there to talk to communities, but the German government, the Germans are really big on importing green hydrogen, and they're using their equivalent of what was DFID, GIZ, to fund organisations in South Africa to be pro-green hydrogen. They're also funding German groups like German Watch, Heimlich Bowl, who are there to have the conversation with groups of, oh, maybe we can do it in a nice way and all these things. So you're seeing all these, the even northern civil society is acting in a very neo-colonial way as well and continue those patterns by continuing to support its government's agenda. So I think it's more important than ever that you give a genuine voice to those who are on the front lines and facing it. So doing this is really important. Because this is, it's global. And I think it's really interesting, the trade unions are a key part of this. So in South Africa, the National Union of Metal Workers, NUMSA, they've been the key ones calling for energy justice. They want an end to coal, phasing out fossil fuels, national and community-owned energy, local renewables, and they're looking at, okay, if we don't want green hydrogen, what do we want? And I think having delegations from the UK and from Europe working with delegations in these countries is a really powerful way to do it, because you also bring different voices. So I think if there's a way, I don't know what unions you're part of, but in your workplace to be making links with these groups and the unions there, and that gives them a lot more strength, particularly in places where there's a lot of oppression. Visibility is really important just for these groups, to make sure they're visible and they feel they have international support when governments will inevitably come and crack down because they're speaking out against international capital.
I just want to come back briefly on a couple of things. I think the thing that struck me most was this choice between fossil fuel extraction and the extraction needed for renewable energy. And I think the phrase you said was every climate activist has got their pet subject. I would say that what we need to do is to hold those pet subjects but actually share a vision that wraps them all together. And the one I would pitch is something called donor economics. Consider the limits of the environmental that we've got to stay within and accept we're well beyond it, not just on climate but many other ecological aspects. But also there's a limit in terms of decent living, which we aren't at for everyone. So we've got to get socially back into the donut from the inside, and we've got environmentally to get back from the outside in. And I think you suggested we need to link inequality and unsustainability in our narrative. I think also we need to link the delivery of equality with the coming within limits. And to do that, I think we need to get away from the current mainstream narrative which is linked to growth, which is always focusing on the supply side, how we can provide more renewable energy, and that leads that discussion about where resources come from, and talk about reducing total energy demand. Work by Julia Steinberger's team, an academic in Europe, looked at the amount of energy that we need to stay within for climate limits globally. And if we were to take our fair share of energy rather than carbon emissions, then the per capita energy use in the UK would be less than the average for the lowest decile in the UK. Now, the only way we can do that is by creating the climate jobs to retrofit very quickly all of the UK housing stock, and then creating the climate jobs to especially on transport. The transport jobs, the greatest inequality between the richest and the poorest in the UK in terms of carbon emissions is in the transport sector. So we need to reduce the ambition for the richest to travel furthest. Unfortunately, that means we will be going less to Europe, because although we might like to, the Channel Tunnel there's only one of them. To create the demand for everyone who currently flies to Europe to go in a tunnel, we need about 5 or 6 tunnels. So we need to travel less. And that's one sort of transition. And that's really demand reduction on transport. But demand reduction on buildings and housing will actually benefit everyone and reduce everyone's emissions down. I think that's that together story about how some things are going to benefit everyone and improve equality, and some things are actually going to reduce excessive consumption. And as a rich nation, that means reducing excessive consumption, not just the richest 10% of the UK, but probably reducing excessive consumption of 60, 70, 80, 90% of the UK. So the far-right narrative might be accurate in some regards. We do need to live in 15-minute neighbourhoods, but we need to avoid the future which the mainstream delivers us, which is the only people who can afford electric vehicles are predominantly richer people who live in the countryside. So you're either stuck in a 15-minute neighbourhood without a car, or you're a rich person that can drive into that 15-minute neighbourhood from far away. So we need to get away from this idea that you can buy yourself out of some social choices and a progressive agenda through money in an electric vehicle. That we need to make sure that the planning for a sustainable future is a planning that reduces and constrains all of our emissions, because otherwise the inequality within our society makes it harder for us to provide enough energy for everyone if collectively we're able to stay within a limit. So donut economics would be my one pitch.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody, all the speakers and everybody that's come and listened. Sorry we haven't had more time for everybody.